Ram Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Ram Ram Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. August Sri Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj. Yeah, Radha and Madhi, when are you ready? You can start, Madhi.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna to all dear devotees. Please accept my humble obeisances. All wish to Srila Prabhupada and Bhakti Maharaj. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam. Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet. नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवते उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी. Today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 29, the talks between the Narada and the king Prachina Dharma. Text 1. The city called Apana represents the engagements of the tongue in speech, and Bahudana is the varieties of the foodstuff. The right ear is called the gate of the Pitru, and the left ear is called the gate of Devahu. Text 13. Narada Muni continued, the city spoken of the Dakshina Panchala represents the scriptures meant for the directing Purvati, the process of sense enjoyment in fruitive activities. The other cities named Uttara Panchala represents the scriptures meant for decreasing the fruitive activity and increasing the knowledge. The living entity receives direct kinds of knowledge by means of 2 ears, and some living entities are promoted to Pitraloka and some to Devaloka. All this is made possible by the 2 ears. Text 14. The city called Gramaka, which is approached through the lower gate of Asuri. The genital organ is meant for sex, which is very pleasing to the common men, who are simply fools and rascals. The faculty of procreation is called Durmada, and the rectum is called Nirhiti. Text 15. When it is said that Puranjana goes to the Vishasa, it is meant that he goes to hell. He is accompanied by the Lubdhaka, which is the working sense in the rectum. Formerly, I have also spoken of 2 blind associates. These associates should be understood to be the hands and legs. Being helped by the hands and legs, the living entity performs all kinds of works and moves hither and thither. Text 16. The word Anta Purna refers to the heart. The word Vishuchina, meaning going everywhere, indicates the mind. Within the mind, the living entity enjoys the effects of the modes of the material nature. These effects sometimes causes illusion, sometimes satisfaction, and sometimes jubilation. Text 17. Formerly, it was explained that the queen is the one's intelligence, while one is awake or asleep. The intelligence creates different situation. Being influenced by the contaminated intelligence, the living entities envisions something and simply imitates the actions and the reactions of his intelligence. Text 18 and 18 to 20. Narada Muni continued, what I referred to as the chariot was in the actuality the body. The senses are the horses that pulls the chariot. As time passes year after year, these horses run without obstruction, but in fact they make no progress. Pious and impious activities are the 2 wheels of the chariot. The 3 modes of the material nature are the chariot's flags. The 5 types of the lives, air, constitute the living entity's bondage, and the mind is considered to be the rope. Intelligence is the chariot driver. The heart is the sitting place in the chariot, and the dualities of life, such as pleasure and pain are the knotting place. The seven elements are the covering of the chariots, and the working senses are the five eternal process. The 11 senses are the soldiers, being engrossed in the sense enjoyment. The living entities seated on the chariot hankers after fulfillment of his false desire and runs after the sense enjoyment life after life. Text 21. What was previously explained as Chandavega, powerful time, is covered by the days and nights named Gandharvas and Gandharvis. The body's lifespan is gradually reduced by the passage of the days and nights, which number 360. Text 22, which was described as Kalakanya, should be understood as old age. No one wants to accept the old age, but Yavaneshwara, Yavana Raja, who is death, accepts Jara, old age, as his sister. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hare Krishna. So Hare Krishna, let me start with the prayers. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah. Namam Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityanamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaurvani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Desatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadara Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay. Say this chapter is wonderful in the sense that it's a summary of the last three chapters. Basically, in the last three chapters, we heard how Narada Muni is addressing King Prachinabarhi, and while addressing King Prachinabarhi, he started telling the allegory story of King Puranjana. That was to indirectly tell him that he's engaging in foodie activities and wasting his life. Instead, he should take up spiritual life and achieve spiritual perfection. That is the conclusion that Narada Muni is driving towards. Towards that conclusion, he told the whole analogy of Puranjana with his wives, servants, and all those things. Finally, in the beginning of this chapter, we heard yesterday that actually that Prachini after hearing the whole story by Nandamani, he said, I did not understand it because I'm too attached. People who are spiritually elevated, they can understand. I am not able to understand. Can you please tell me more directly, and explain the meaning of this? Like that, he asked. That's when Nardamuni started to explain the allegory, what Puranjana represents the spirit soul, the city represents the body with the senses, all that he started to explain. So, by Sri Prabhupada's mercy, by the purports, we already discussed that in the previous chapters. So, that is why it is actually special mercy that we are able to summarize that whole pastime of three chapters. Sometimes, whenever we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam also, it is helpful to contemplate what did I read, what was the overall essence, what was the flow of what I read, what is the flow of what I heard in the last few days. Like that is important to contemplate. So that opportunity this chapter is giving for us now. So that is the overall context. Going to the verse number 12 today, which is in the middle of the verses, where it's talking about how we are using different senses to engage in sense gratification or in fruity activities somehow or other. That's what this section is talking about. Now, going to text number 12 is talking about how we engage the tongue with for speech. What kind of speech? Speech that is not helpful for a spiritual elevation. Speech that is detrimental sometimes to spiritual elevation, especially when we make offenses to devotees, or especially we hurt other living entities, devotees or any other living entities also. So that's how speech is used. Maybe I'll mention the overall theme and essence of this section, and then we'll go into some details and then emphasize on essence again. So overall essence of this section is how we should understand by the influence of the modes of nature, material modes of nature, we're engaging in so many busy activities. But finally, those activities are not helping towards spiritual elevation. So when we understand that, then we follow the directions of the spiritual master and sadhu and shastra, and then through that we redirect our aspirations, our goals. That means we set our values properly according to spiritual aspirations. According to the values we set, we establish goals that align with those values, spiritual values, and then we align our activities according to those goals that help us in spiritual elevation. So that is the overall essence of this whole chapter, few chapters of the Puranjana pastime. Ensure we have the right values and right aspirations, and for that we set the right goals and then perform right activities that are aligning with the goals and values that help us with spiritual elevation. Not just keeping busy. Keeping busy is not the purpose of life. Otherwise, I will be doing different things, just time passes away. Yeah, that's the overall essence of this section. Now going into the detail with that paradigm in mind. So we talked about how tongue engages in speech. We should redirect the speech in a proper way that helps in spiritual elevation, not just do something, talk something. That's not the purpose of life. Sometimes when people are together, they talk just because they want to talk something. So when that urge comes of talking something, we should speak something we read, something we heard. So that means if we're not able to talk something spiritual, that means we should understand I'm not giving enough time for hearing spiritual topics, enough time for reading spiritual topics. Because if I'm giving most of my time in hearing news or something all the time, then whatever I speak will be according to what I hear or what I read, which is if I mundane topics come out. But if my absorption is spiritual topics come out. So like that, we can test ourselves and immerse in spiritual topics. Another aspect in this verse is talking about how tongue is also engaged in eating different varieties of foodstuffs. Again, as practicing devotees, we talked a few days ago, our our aspiration is to engage the tongue, the propensity of tasting food for the tongue, to engage in tasting varieties of prasadam and not something that is offered to Krishna. Ideally, our highest standard is to eat something that is offered to Krishna by cooking with devotion for Krishna by devotees. That means we only eat food that is cooked by devotees, number one. And number two, that food cooked by devotees which is offered to Krishna. That we accept as remnants with the right consciousness. That Krishna, I cannot control my senses. This is the essence of our prayer, right? Sharira Vidya prayers. My senses are very difficult to control. They're actually paths leading to death. So you are so far, you are so merciful that you gave me this prasadam so that I can control this voracious tongue, and then that way I can glorify you after taking this prasadam and after being satisfied. Glorify how? By Shravanam and Kirtanam. Yeah. So and of course Seva. Seva is also glorification of Krishna. So with that mood, we accept food and we accept only prasadam. That way, we are contributing towards spiritual elevation, not degradation. How food can contribute to degradation? When the food is not cooked by devotees, and the food is not offered to Krishna, then we'll be affected to more and more material modes influence, especially modes of passion and mode of ignorance, depending upon the person cooking and their consciousness. That means on one side, we're trying to elevate our consciousness to mode of goodness and beyond to Vishuddha Sattva. On the other side, if we're eating food that is in modes, then we're degrading ourselves to mode of passion and ignorance. So that is why we need to understand how our actions are contributing towards our goals or not. Yeah, this is important principle, whether it's material goal or spiritual goal. Ultimately, our spiritual purpose of life guides our activities and engagement of senses also. Going to the next verse, text number 13. This is describing how scriptures have directions for somebody to increase more and more sense gratification by through more and more fruitive activity. Scriptures also have directions to reduce sense gratification and fruitive activity and strive towards elevation spiritually. So depending upon what portion of scriptures we follow, we'll either increase the lifetime in this material world by going to heavenly planets or going to Pitraloka, enjoying for some time and then falling down again and continuing again, or we follow the directions that help us to liberate from the material world, to get out of the spiritual world and follow them properly like that. So sometimes if you are inclined for sense gratification, we might be tempted to think, oh, scriptures say that, so scriptures are authorizing my sense gratification, so let me do that. So scriptures give both directions for us, either to increase sense gratification or to reduce sense gratification also. So we should be careful to understand the purpose of life and take the appropriate portion of scriptures and apply it in our life. So why do scriptures tell both of them then? Because there are certain people who are at such a stage of life, they cannot understand any language other than sense gratification. So even if you tell them scriptural knowledge, they ask me, how can this help me in my office? How can this help me in my enjoyment? That is their paradigm. So for them, scriptures give directions directed towards sense enjoyment also. Then are the scriptures rude? Are the scriptures hurting them? Are the Krishna is not helping them? No, no. Because even if they follow scriptures with the purpose of sense gratification at least, they will elevate from their current stage because they're following the authority of Vedas, which is authority of Krishna indirectly, because scriptures are given by Krishna only. So that way they're making gradual elevation. But we practicing devotees, we need to go beyond that stage of trying to find a loophole to enjoy. Instead, we should try to see how I can serve Krishna, how I can elevate my spiritual consciousness, what is helpful for my, favorable for my bhakti, what is unfavorable for my bhakti. We have to be very conscious of that and apply in our life accordingly. So going to the next verse, 14th verse. 14th verse is talking about how people use genitals for irregulated sex life. We know from scriptures the purpose of sex life is for procreation, for creating progeny. That is the main purpose of sex life, not a recreation, because sex life has several detrimental effects. So common people who may not understand the detrimental effects of sex life are referred here as fools and rascals in this verse. So basically, we heard in the previous chapters how Puranjana, in the absorption of sex life, he forgot the purpose of life and wasted his entire life thinking about, planning about, performing these irreligious activities. So that's what this purport is also highlighting for us, that we should understand that engaging in sex life for enjoyment is for lowest people, lowest among men. Arvak is the term used. So by understanding that, we need to engage in higher spiritual pleasures. So this is one important principle we need to learn. Unless I engage in a higher pleasure, I cannot get rid of the lower pleasure. So what is the higher pleasure for practicing devotees? For practicing devotees, higher pleasure is when we engage in spiritual activities in a proper consciousness that gives us a real taste and real pleasure, real satisfaction in the heart. When we are able to taste that, then it's easy to give up these lower pleasures. So that means if you're not able to taste it currently, then we need to adjust our spiritual practices in such a way and consciousness in such a way that we can experience the spiritual taste, spiritual pleasure that comes with the Shravanam Kirtan. For example, reading scriptures, hearing scriptures, engaging in spiritual activity to serve others, other book distribution, Harinam Sankirtan, or serving in the temple somehow, or worshipping deities, like that. We need to engage in spiritual activities and taste that spiritual pleasure. That is the key for us. When we taste the spiritual pleasure and spiritual taste, then we can move forward very fast, because then we can, whatever we feel happy with, we can tend to do more. So same thing. So that's why our initial practices is with the direction of Guru, Sadhu, Shastra, engage in spiritual activities with the spiritual consciousness. That is important. Okay, not just activities for activity's sake, for pleasing Krishna. Then we'll experience the spiritual pleasure. Even if, for example, somebody is learning verses, that also can give spiritual pleasure when they are doing it for pleasure of Krishna. Because it's the words of Krishna that we're reciting with the verses. Then that gives satisfaction to the heart. Then when a heart is satisfied, then we're not hankering for lower pleasures that relate to body and mind. So that is the essence of this verse for us. Going to text number 15. Text number 15 is highlighting in the analogy about rectum is going towards hell, like that. And then also it's highlighting how there are two blind associates, which are hands and legs, that are described in the analogy. So we, if we don't direct our hands and legs, which are called one of some of the working senses, out of the five working senses, hands and legs are the important working senses we have. If we don't direct our blind associates, which are hands and legs, why are called blind? Because they will do whatever you want to do. That means they are directed by mind and intelligence, which are higher than the working senses. So we should develop the higher spiritual aspirations, spiritual goals, and spiritual intelligence to understand how to direct our hands and legs to do the right activity, to go to the right place. So when we can direct like that, so we can save ourselves from going to hell. Instead, we're going to go back to spiritual world in the association of Krishna. So that is the essence of this particular verse. So going to text number 16, this talking about how Antapura is referring to heart, and then Visuchina is referring to going everywhere. That is indicating the mind. And then within the mind, the living entity enjoys the effects of the modes of material nature. So this is important point to understand. Mind and intelligence are affected by modes of nature unless we are trying to engage in service of Krishna. And based on the association of the modes of nature, goodness, passion, or ignorance, the mind is directed here, directed there, like that. And accordingly, mind will direct the senses also. Similarly, the heart will be not feeling the permanent satisfaction that comes with spiritual life. If we if you if you're if we are in the influence of the modes of nature and not directing ourselves, our mind and intelligence to spiritual life, then our heart will be sometimes satisfied, sometimes bewildered, like that. That means there's no permanent satisfaction. That is experienced by heart also. But instead, if we engage in spiritual pursuit, then our heart will be satisfied. Why? Because our heart is hankering for a natural satisfaction that comes with our constitutional position of being able to serve Krishna. When we are in that position, then we naturally derive the satisfaction, like that. Going to text number 17, here the queen Puranjani is referring to one's material intelligence. That's what Nadamani is clarifying here again. And then, because if somebody is influenced by material intelligence, the intelligence is contaminated. So that is the state of the conditioned souls. And by being forced by the contaminated intelligence, one will act in a way that is not suitable for his spiritual elevation. That is the point being mentioned here. So we should understand, right now my intelligence is contaminated. So how do you spiritualize that intelligence? By chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. That purifies us. And then by engaging in study of Shastra, by hearing and reading scriptures. Through that, we can spiritualize our intelligence. We can reduce, purify our contamination of the intelligence. That way, we'll aspire for the right things and we'll be determined to do the right things also. Because this process of purification of Bhakti Yoga helps us not only telling what is the right thing, but gives us the ability to do the right thing also. Because many people know what to do the right thing, but they don't have strength to do right things. So if I'm evaluating my life and see, I know this, such high things, but why am I not able to practice those high things? Then we need to strengthen our practices of sharpening our spiritual intelligence through our sadhana. When we can strengthen our sadhana, then we can do the right things like that. Of course, because we are conditioned for so many years or so many lifetimes, we still have a tendency to deviate occasionally. So we should understand that is because of the past conditioning. But as long as I focus back on my sadhana nicely, then I can get over this. That we should understand. In fact, we can gain that confidence by observing ourselves. 10 years ago, every time I chant one mantra, one Hare Krishna Mahamantra, I wanted to do something else instead. 5 years ago, after every one round of mantra, then I want to do something else instead. But now I'm able to do few rounds sitting at one place without having to, mind doesn't think, okay, what should I do office? What should I do at work? What should I cook? Oh, what will my children do doing? So instead of doing that, I'm at least able to focus for few rounds now. When we see that progression in ourselves, not from 0 to 100%, but 0 to 10%, 20%, 30%, then that gives us a confidence and enthusiasm to proceed more and more like that in Bhakti Yoga. That's another thing we constantly contemplate and evaluate ourselves so that we can increase our confidence and strive with more motivation for practicing Bhakti more sincerely and more seriously. Going to the next verse, text 18 to 20, this verse is talking about what we already talked about in the 26th chapter, beginning of the 26th chapter, which is the analogy of the chariot. Uh, His Grace Gauranga Prabhu shared the analogy in a picture format. I believe it's Radhesham Prabhu or some devotee did this picture, it seems. So let me see if I can make it bigger. So this analogy we already discussed in 26th chapter. This is just a recap. So one of the key things to get from this analogy is still blank only. It's coming up, looks like. I don't know what's going on. Oh yeah, came up, good. So even if we don't remember all these details, okay? So the key details we hear from Bhagavad Gita also. I'll share that essence first, okay? The essence is that the horses are the senses, like you see here, and then the reins are the mind, and the driver is the intelligence, and we are the spirit soul sitting in the chariot. Okay. So now we either we can direct the driver where we want to go, so he can direct the reins and direct the horses. Okay. In the analogy. Similarly, we strengthen and sharpen our spiritual intelligence. So, using our spiritual intelligence, we direct our mind, and then that will direct the senses. Instead of senses saying, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do that, and saying mind, oh, yes, I really want to do that. And intelligence saying, how can I do that? And then we just end up doing what our senses want to do. Instead, we should drive our life with a spiritual purpose, with the sharpened spiritual intelligence that will drive the mind and that will drive the senses. That's the main thing. Instead, this verse is talking about how we will be driven by this pain, that pleasure, like that. I want to get this pain, that pleasure, like that. Our senses are going here and there currently. So, and sometimes we're just going, doing things. That is like horse is running everywhere but no progress. Let us say I want to go in a chariot from here to temple. But instead I'm sitting in the chariot and horses are taking me opposite direction from temple. So what is the use of that going? It's doing hard work. But what is the use of it? Similarly, in our life also, we should direct our senses through the sharpened spiritual intelligence and redirected mind to do the right things according to the spiritual purpose. So basically, I'll cover the last two verses and mention a couple of important points for us, how to practically apply this in our life. So last verses 21 and 22 are talking about how the time is running out, how Chandavega is nothing but time, how the Gandharvas and Gandharvis are nothing but days and nights. As the days and nights are going, time is running out in our life. That's what 21st verse is talking about. And 22nd verse is talking about as we get older and older, we're, we're getting old age. That is the Kalakanya in the analogy. And then nobody wants old age, but death Yavana Raja or Yavaneshwara, who is the death, accepts old age as a sister. So, so that Yavana Raja uh, accepting old age, so we should understand old age debilitates us. Old age makes it more and more difficult for us to practice spiritual life or even material life also. So with that understanding, those who are not old yet, do the best you can in spiritual life now. Those who are already old now, do the best you can in the current status of life. Because Krishna accepts whatever we can do in any condition of life. That is one lesson we can learn. So now, how practically we hear so many things in spiritual life. How do you practically approach this in terms of managing our time? One simple principle I'll mention. One is have our spiritual purpose, spiritual goals very clear. Then, when we see all the activities we need to spend our time with, see them, are they helping me towards my spiritual life? Are they helping me with material life? So accordingly, the importance will change for that. Something for spiritual elevation is higher importance compared to something for continuing material life. Number one point. So most of you might have known Eisenhower matrix of prioritization that talks about four quadrants based on importance and urgency. So that essence I'm sharing, but with a higher dimension of purpose of life that is not shared by general material Eisenhower matrix. It only talks about what is important, but what is important is determined by what is helping me with my spiritual elevation, number one. And Eisenhower matrix talks about what is urgent, right? So what is urgent is based on if I don't do this right now, what is the serious effect of it tomorrow, next week, next month, like that. When we see that, then urgency will come into play. Urgency is based on how it can seriously impact my spiritual life, like that. So when we have these two in mind, then we always make time in our schedule for what is most important, but may not be urgent right now at this minute. For example, we know chanting is the most important thing because that helps us sharpen our intelligence, purify our heart, so it can direct our heart in a proper way, like that. So then we make time for our chanting every day. That is one important thing. And the prominent time of the day, like that. Yeah, that is the early morning, if as much as possible. So like that, we give time in our calendar for the most important things first. Yeah. Then when we have time for most important things, sometimes something is important, something is urgent also comes up. Then we take care of that particular time. But something is not important, something is urgent. We need to evaluate, am I the right person to do it? Or somebody can help me with this and delegate it, like that. And so, and the more we do important things every day in our life, then urgent things, crisis, problem situations don't come again and again. So that means if I'm always, my life is always about I need to do this, I need to do this, I need to do this, always urgent. That means I'm not giving time in my calendar for important things. That's so we need to understand. For example, I don't take care of health by doing exercise and eating healthy food right now. What will happen? Urgent things will come in terms of diseases later on. Then I cannot say why did this disease come? It's because I'm not doing exercise right now. I'm not eating healthy food right now. Then I'm not spending time for myself right now. So then diseases will come. So that's why we need to give time for exercise, time for making healthy food, eating healthy food like that. Because otherwise we don't have time to cook healthy food. We have time to cook something fast. So the important and urgent things we take care of. And something not important, not urgent. These are sense gratification activities like scrolling through social media. These are talking unnecessary things, arguing for unnecessary things, spending time for unnecessary things on the internet. These we can avoid them. Why? So we can use that time for more important things. Yeah. So one way, that is how we need to evaluate our time. So that way, this with the understanding that time is running out. How Chandavega with Gandharvas and Gandharvis, days and nights are running out. And how time is spent in sense gratification by the influence of modes and nature. That is what we are supposed to understand from this whole story. Understand the value of time, understand the value of spiritual life, and focus on spiritual life instead of letting our time pass away by this thing, that thing. I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to do this, I want to help this way, I want to help that. So all that seems like activity, but not activity to our aligned to our spiritual goals and spiritual values. So that is the essence we want to get from this section. We'll hear more from this section, especially from Narad Muni, the urgency of taking up spiritual life. We'll hear in this chapter towards the end also. Narad Muni will tell one more analogy or allegory about the deer will coming up. Yeah. So that's a sense of urgency we can take from this section and manage our time according to our spiritual values and spiritual goals. We'll pause here.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavibhyo namo namaha.
Thank you so much, devotees, for your association. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hari Om.